Cool. Sorry for the delay. We're running off of Alexander's presentation where the theme was a little bit about what's best for Magento community is best for each of us and our individual stores. And you may be wondering, so a guy came down here with really great hair earlier today and talked a lot about security. What am I doing here? It's going to be a little bit different. So his take was PCI compliance, which is very important from the credit card perspective. But what I want to cover is from a developer perspective. Show of hands, any merchants here? Or just all developers? Guido's a merchant. There we go. So from a developer perspective, I want to cover the way we need to start thinking about our development and working with security practices in Magento, as opposed to what the conventions are for PCI compliance and where we could get into a lot of trouble. Mind you, PCI compliance is very important, but we'll get there in a second. So a little bit about me. That's my name, that's my email, that's my Twitter, and you don't need to take photos. The slides are actually online right now at that URL. On my spare time, I climb mountains. This weekend. I was in Pico Al Manzur in Sistema Central. It was tons of fun. If I'm not doing Magento, this is what I'm doing. Based out of the Great White North, painted red here, Canada. And before we jump into anything else, I wanted to just give you an idea of how bad things can be if you don't pay attention to security properly. You may be thinking, I do hosted payments, and I send all my credit cards to my payment company. I should be safe. Magento does bcrypt, and it saves passwords, so I should be fine. But you know what? You know who always did all of that stuff? We'll skip the slide. So yeah, we don't store credit card data. We should be safe. Magento encrypts things properly, but these guys didn't store their customer data either. And we all knew what went wrong with Ashley Madison. The funny thing is they're based out of Toronto also, and they tried to hire me once. So if you look at the emails from the dump that took place and the infiltration that took place for Ashley Madison, they had one or two things right. They didn't store customer credit card data, and they encrypted their passwords with bcrypt, which was excellent choice. But they're also aware of the fact that they had security problems in their site, and there was emails that going back and forth. But the thing is, they had no idea how to approach it, or they had no plan of how to approach it, including once they got broken into, they had no plan as to how to respond to it, which was, I believe, the worst part of what happened. And you may be saying, you know what? I'm a Magento developer. I've got Magento stores and Euroflorist. No one wants to hack into Euroflorist. People really want to break into, Ashley Madison. But here's the thing. Patreon got hacked a couple months later, and Patreon's a donor program, and everything was spilled on the internet, including private communications. So for this side, Patreon, and also for Ashley Madison, I'm quite sure the people whose information was spread over the internet would have been much happier if the hackers just went in and stole their credit cards. They'd be happy, just like, yeah, we'll fix it, we'll figure it out, get a new credit card. But the fact of the matter is, identifiable information that was not a password and it was not a credit card was exfiltrated from these companies. And this is something we as developers need to be aware of. One more thing. You may be saying, look, you know what? We don't even have customer data on our site. We don't store anything. Everyone checks out as a guest. Okay? We should be fine. We don't need to think too much about security. But you know what? Google doesn't care. And this is a couple days ago. Please forgive the terrible article. I'm not too happy with these guys at Sakuri, but it's true that Google has blacklisted a bunch of Magento sites. So, it's going to affect your bottom line, so we need to think about security a little bit better. And I wanted to just give you an idea of why I think this is really important right now. You may have heard about me before, but I've really decided I want to start talking about this at this stage in the game for various reasons. First of all, who remembers one of these? Yeah? You've had those? Do you remember when you first got your Mac and you're like, you know what, I don't need to install antivirus? Macs don't have viruses. Yeah, someone's nodding their head at me. I used to say that too when I got my Mac, you know? But since then, we all know, like, Apple's been broken into regularly. It's the same thing with Magento. At the beginning, Magento was, pretty obscure, Nobody wanted to hack into Magento. But these days, we've seen very directed attacks at Magento. People want to get into Magento. It's not like, a fly-by script. People are writing custom code to getting to Magento. And the fact of the matter is we're no longer not worth the effort. We are worth the effort, and this is solely due to your success. The Magento success as a community has brought this. And I have some show notes here that I can't see. Give me one sec. There we go. So yeah, we've become a pretty big deal in the e-commerce world, and this is why we're now worth the effort, and we need to now step up our own game because it's an arms race, and we have to become more vigilant. And in my work as a security consultant, I see people's websites and development practices all around the world, and it's just a disaster, and we need to improve it. One of the second reasons I want to talk about this is because of bullshit like this. I mean, computer world, people would read that and say, okay, these guys are reputable. But this article title is misleading, and the article content is misleading. This was just meant to get hits on their website. The fact of the matter is that this article is written about a site that was not patched after Magento has done a really good job patching the site. I mean, putting out patches. So, when people put stuff out like this, it affects the Magento platform, and it affects every single one of us who work with the Magento platform. So going along with what Alexander said, I'm trying to avoid, any decline in the quality of work people expect from the Magento platform when it comes to e-commerce. And the last reason is you could be held very responsible for any sort of security problems on your platform. This was passed in the United States about a couple months ago, where you could be sued, and the developers of the platform could be held very liable for any security flaws that happen in it. So you're also trying to protect your own interests. So now I've given you an idea of how badly things could go, and it doesn't necessarily need to be credit cards, and why I really think this needs to be done. So just a little background of why I call it a trail map. One, I like hiking metaphors. But two, I can't give you everything we need to talk about security. I mean, you could ask Kaylin and Phil. Last night we were up until 4 a.m. talking about Magento security, specifically 6788 and the Mage Report site. I'm not sure if you've heard about Mage Report. You could go onto that site, put in your URL, and it will tell you what you're vulnerable for. So there's a lot of discussion to take place, but what I want to do instead is give you just a basic idea of where we are now, where we should be aiming towards, and try to get a big picture view of what needs to be done, in my view, for improving the Magento community. By the way, I'm not going to teach you how to configure Apache, PHP, Magento, SE Linux, none of that. If you come here expecting some magic configuration setting that would protect your Magento site, this is not the place. You got Google for that. And here's the reason why. This looks familiar to you, right? You got Varnish, some Apache old versions, mod PHP. I could show you how to lock this down in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe. They allotted time. I don't know how much I have left after computer problems. But it's not going to help the guy who's got a cloud server with all this stuff and a WAF in there and Redis 3 times. And it's not going to help the guy who's got his admin behind an OpenVPN. So there's no limit to the amount of ways Magento could be configured and run in a production environment. So me helping you fix your own system is not going to work. So instead, I want to do a little bit of a different take on it. One important thing we got to talk about is we're not going to talk about Magento as a platform, because there has been a lot of silent effort taking place behind the scenes by Piotr and his team to make sure that patches are coming out really quickly. There's a lot of very good content being put out there. Has anyone read the best practices, this second link here? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. I think, there's lots of links in this. This is the first one you should read because a lot of effort has gone into that, and it's a good baseline. Phil's talk for PCI compliance is your second step up from that. So once you've covered those, let's start going into what else is needed. Because we've got, the platform, which I'm not going to talk about, and we've got Magento itself, which I can't, get into. But the important thing is nobody runs a vanilla Magento install, and we need to, sorry, I got to get my slide notes. View the high presenter notes? No. Does anyone know how to do slide notes? I had this set up on my computer. Yeah, okay. So yeah, displays, arrangement, mirror. There we go. What's going on? Yeah. So what do you guys see? So it's the wrong way around. Sure? Hit play? No. Presenter's notes. There we go. Nice. So what I want to do is talk about the big picture of security instead. I think this is more important than showing you how to lock down your Magento store, because if you could take this approach, you could apply it to whatever configuration you have, be it the one cloud server with tons of application servers, or just one or two servers. And the big picture approach is something that's called the information assurance model, and for better or for worse, the NSA is a big proponent of this model. And there's three key elements to this. One is people, two is process, and three is the technology. And if you notice, I put technology at the bottom because, in all honesty, in my estimation, it's the least important of them all. It's more important that within your organizations, you have the people and the process set up. It doesn't matter if you're using the oldest version of VPN. If that people and process key is in there, you'll have a much stronger defensive approach to Magento. So let's talk about people first. It's you. You need to have within your organization a mindset of approaching your development process more securely. Security is inherently a risk/effort balance. And Peter had a question earlier today about PCI compliance, and it doesn't really matter in Europe, but it is your risk. Are you willing to risk being broken into, and the effort that it takes? So you've got to make that decision within your organization. So that's why in the people side of things is really you. But let's talk about process. Process is the big part of the information assurance model and PCI compliance. We had an excellent talk about PCI compliance by Phil this morning, and if you missed it, you should feel bad. The thing about it is PAA DSS, which is the technical side of things, and PCI compliance does not make your site unhackable. And unfortunately, this is one of the myths out there. It's like, if you're PCI compliant, you're safe. Unfortunately, it's not true. It's an excellent starting point. And if you need to know more and you've missed it, look for this guy. That's his URL. He's going to have slideshows up there. Yeah, it's just this guy. Don't look for his face. That's his hair. That's all you need to know. Look for him. You'll be able to learn all you need to know about PCI compliance. So the thing about process is it's more important than technology. And in my view, process is documented within your organization. So it's a repeatable pattern of how you make sure that your Magento sites are defendable. And by defendable, I mean it's something that, oh, geez, I got to look at my notes again. So when your Magento site's defendable, it means that should anything happen, you are 100% aware of how this Magento store was set up. You remember the colorful diagrams I had. And you know which actions to take. And documentation is a requirement, because if you don't have documentation, one guy's going to set up one Magento store one way, another one's going to set up another way, one gets broken into, you don't know what's going on, and there's no standardization across the board. If it's not documented, it's not a process in your organization. And some of these processes can be enforced by technology, by example, VPN. One important part of process, and it also works with the people side of things, is that you need stewardship of your application and data. What this means is you need people within your organization who are always going to be the ones looking out for how your application is being coded. He's the one who's going to be, you know what, you shouldn't be using that get variable, or you should be encrypting that. It's really important. So you need to have to identify a person within your team who would be looking out for this in code reviews, in QA testing, to make sure that you have someone always holding your secure interests in mind. Yeah, directly relates to your people. I'm way out of time. So one other process that you might want to consider implementing is a patch schedule and process. We all know patch landed yesterday or today. Apparently there's been some updates. But you need to have a process for implementing that patch onto your site. And really good example, Alexander, I was speaking with him yesterday. I was like, what are your thoughts on the patch? And he's like, well, we have a process. We know, if it comes out, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to verify it. And this is the approach we're going to take. And he had a very well-defined process for getting his extensions patched to deal with the latest vulnerability or anything that comes up, because these things are going to start coming more often, and we know Magento is going to be patching the system. You also need to be aware of patching other parts of your stack, your operating system, your firewall, your application stack. You've got to have some sort of process documented to say, as soon as PHP comes out saying, there's a new security patch for 5.6.1 to 5.6.2 or something, you need to have a process in place to upgrade that. And that's part of what I'm talking about, is it's important to have a process documented in your organization. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what technology you're running. It's still going to be vulnerable. Couple other ideas, launch security and account policies. Not going to get into it because I'm running out of time. Most important part of the security process. What do you do when you have a compromise? No one wants to think about that, okay? There is very few things you could do when you have a compromise that is going to prevent anything from getting better. Sadly, this is what it looks like. You got to have a plan and a team and breach containment and escalation and communication and containing damage and minimizing risk and get in touch with law enforcement and da-da-da. So yeah, it's a lot. Too much to get into today. So instead, what I have done is, a couple times for clients in the past, I have had to build an incident response plan, and I've decided to open source this. So I put it up on GitHub, and it's public right now. So thank you. I'd really appreciate if I get pull requests, because while I'm good at PHP, I suck at English. So feel free to issue pull requests. And basically, it's something I want us as a community to share between every single Magento developer and store. So that should anything happen to a Magento store, that company has a plan and knows how to go forward with doing all the steps that I had listed in the previous slide. And it's there for you to take a look at. It's heavily based, believe it or not, on work done by Microsoft. And I know it doesn't sound good, but Microsoft has been stepping up their security recently. So yeah, feel free to fork it, pull it, share it within your organization. There may be a license there, but really I don't care. Just take it, use it. I'd rather you steal it and use it and go to your boss and say, look at this crazy thing I came up with, and get a promotion, but still use it, than be involved saying, hey, Talesh gave me this or anything like that. So I said technology is one of the least important things, and I'm still not going to cover any deep technology, but I'm going to walk through two basic principles, and we're coming on to the end here. The first one is defense in depth. And what defense in depth means is that at every level of your application, of your Magento store, you defend it as well as you can. So you have an SSL tunnel for your entire store. You don't SSL only your cart, okay? So your entire store runs on HTTPS. That's defense in depth, because then someone with a man-in-the-middle attack cannot override your cart pages and just blow away the SSL. I was saying to earlier someone today, is like, if you don't have your entire site on HTTPS, as far as I'm concerned, none of it's on HTTPS. There's tons of technologies for doing this, SSL offloading and this sort of stuff, but it's an example of defense in depth. So you protect your Magento site at that stage, but you also protect it at the XSS stage. You don't want to have cross-site scripting taking place on your store. And then you also protect it at a database level. You encrypt data. So if somebody's really keen on breaking into your site, they've got to get through the SSL, then they've got to get through whatever else, and then they figure out a way to get through all of that 2 months later, and they're still dedicated. They get to your database and it's encrypted. They just might give up, okay? So this is the principle behind defense in depth. You put it at every single layer, because sometimes the smallest failure in a layer, the weakest link in the chain, brings the entire thing down. We'll skip the slide. And another technology principle, we call it the principle of least privilege. And I think it's something that we're all very familiar with if you've seen this. Who does not know what this is? Except Keto. Who's written a module for Magento and not implemented this? Yeah, brave guy. And sometimes it's one thing that you forget and you're like, yeah, screw it, we don't need to do ACL. We just gotta admin and he does everything. But ACL is the concept of least privilege. And the fact that it means that if someone has access to a system, they should have access to only what they need. So should that account or should that privilege or credentials get compromised, it can only affect that much. And the principle of least privilege is very apparent in ACL lists, but it's one of the most resilient ways you could protect your store. So I'm just gonna run through. This is the last little bit. So defense in depth and least privilege, and a great example is SC Linux. Who here has enforcing turned off on SC Linux on your live hosts? 1, 2. Who's got it set to permissive? Who has no idea what the fuck I'm talking about? Okay. All of you guys with your hands up? Write this down. So, SC Linux is both defense in depth and least privilege. What it does, it makes sure on the operating system level of your production store, the files, the ports, the services, the daemons, the executables that's required for serving your Magento site can only be done by whatever needs access to it. So least privilege, okay? Your Apache daemon cannot serve a file that's on your home directory, or it cannot serve your password file if you don't want it to. So that's why SC Linux is a very good example of least privilege, but it's also a very good example of defense in depth. If someone could get past your network and plug in a USB into your server and somehow execute an executable on your physical box, they probably can't get access to your database because it's not going to let that executable pull your data, because SC Linux has those, because you have that defense in depth layer that has nothing to do with Magento. It's your operating system. So I encourage everyone to look at this video. It only hurts for a little while once you get started with it. It's a 40-minute video. It'll hurt for about a month. But I'd suggest you do it. Just tying it up, and I'm going to go through this bit really quickly. So what I really want to communicate, reactionary security is no longer an option for us because we are popular and we've made it. and eyes are looking at us. Unfortunately, it's the eyes of the black hats. Focusing on the big picture will help you in the long run. Don't think too much about how do I secure my Apache, how do I secure my PHP, what configuration settings. Think about how am I going to implement this in my company or in my open source project. And from there, you'd be able to get all those bits and pieces you need off Google, or ask it on Magento Stack Exchange or something like that. So the people and the processes you invest in are more important in technology, because you could have the best VPN out there, and if no one's using it, or if everyone's sharing the password, it's useless. People and process, most important. And any sensible security strategy needs to include details on how to respond to attacks. You have the GitHub link, fork it, pull it, use it, steal it. I don't care. I just want you to use it. One last thing, very last thing. If you do encounter some sort of security flaw, responsible disclosure. Please don't blog about it. Don't post blogs about it, because you know what? You're going to get no reputation in the community whatsoever, and I'll probably call you out on Twitter and yell at you. Here's your email, security@magento.com. I think Piotr actually looks at that email more than his own. And there's another URL there, so you can report something. And Magento has, I have seen, been extremely responsive as of late with responding to things. So don't blog it. And you know, the guys at Sakuri, they did find something legit, but the approach they took was abhorrent in my perspective. So that's the end of it. There's some credits. Fabrizio, I got a photo from him and some icons, and I stole a screenshot from Alan because I'm lazy. And that's my contact information. And another link for the slides if you need it. So thank you so much. And I hope you took something away from this.